Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about flow. It's a topic I'm very passionate about. I've been passionate about it for many years. I've wanted to make this video for a long time. So here we are. I'm going to talk about it. So when it comes to the word flow, I think we hear this word quite a bit thrown around in our culture. So you've heard being in flow, not being in flow, akin to being in the zone, not being in the zone. And when it comes to flow experiences, this is referring to something very specific. So I'll get into what that means. But I also want to invite you all in the comment section down below. Please share with me one flow experience you've had, and maybe one that's not related to books or reading, though I am going to relate this video to books and reading, just FYI. Now, I found out about this topic because I read the book Flow by Csikszentmihalyi. I'm sorry if I'm getting that pronunciation wrong, but this particular book, even though it came out well over a decade ago, it is something that is continuously studied. You see research articles pop up all the time where people are applying flow to various domains. In this particular book, we're talking about the psychology of optimal experience. That's the subtitle of the book. So a flow experience is not just a pleasant experience. A flow experience is an optimal experience. It's a peak experience. And you can have a flow experience in a variety of tasks and activities. There are so many chapters where he talks about flow in various activities, even at work, even in difficult situations, even in dangerous situations, and even in seemingly mundane tasks. However, they all have certain things in common, which is what we'll talk about with the flow experience. Another thing that's important to point out is the channel of flow. Before you could have a flow experience, it's going to be important to practice patience and a certain investment of effort at the front end of that activity. So, for example, the runner's high. I think that could be considered a flow experience. But in order to have a runner's high, most runners don't just automatically have them. A pleasant run is not the same thing as a runner's high, for one. But two, you probably have to spend some time getting coordinated in the task of running in order to ever experience that. When it comes to having a flow experience, though, once you have those set of skills established for the most part, then your skill level has to match the challenge at hand. And as you meet those challenges, guess what? Your skill level increases. Then the challenge needs to increase. When those two things occur simultaneously, when they increase simultaneously, then you are able to enter the flow channel. This is the famous chart. I'll put it on the screen for the flow channel. The way I like to describe this is playing Super Mario Brothers the very first time. Let's say you've never played a video game in your life and you're playing Super Mario Brothers. You might, at the front end, have to learn how to get the controller, coordinate your hands in such a way that you're able to coordinate Mario to be able to jump over gaps or squash enemies, dodge fireballs. Those are certain skills you're learning at the front end, but then eventually you get the hang of it at the very beginning of the game and you start progressing through the level. And as you're progressing through the level, it might be a bit challenging, but eventually you beat the level. And once you beat the level, your skill level has increased while you were playing through that level. But guess what? The next level is going to be a little bit more challenging to meet your increasing skill level. So it's constantly meeting you where you are. I think that's why video games are so effective, by the way, in immersing people. But it's important that these two things work together because if the challenge is too difficult, you might get anxious or you might get burnt out and you might quit. If the challenge is too easy, if level 2 is just as easy as level 1, you'll get bored. And so neither will obviously lead to an optimal experience. So it's very important that those two things work together, the challenge with the experience and the skill level. Now to talk about the various components of flow. And again, I'm going to be relating this to reading. Goals are clear. What is meant by that is that if you're climbing a rock, you know exactly where to put your hand next when you're climbing that rock. If you're running, you know exactly where the next mile marker is, where you're running to, or what the goal is. And the other thing too, like if you're playing a piece of music, you know what the next notes are that you're going to play. So there could be a sense of anticipation with the goals and knowing exactly what's next. When it comes to reading, the goals might be what you understand the story to be, what you understand this particular part of the story to be doing. So if you're reading the name of the wind, and I'm just throwing an example out. And maybe you're reading about Kvothe and his childhood. You understand that you're getting to learn about this character's childhood and how that's informing who he's going to be in future times. So, the importance of having an understanding of what the author is trying to lead to. The goals are clear and the feedback is clear. You're immediately getting a sense of that feedback. You're immediately getting a sense of, okay, if I'm reading about Kvothe and his childhood, of how that's being illustrated, of what you're getting out of that. So, those things are very important in the reading experience. And I think this goes along with being able to understand what you're reading and understand the intention of the author rather than read against the text and maybe having to adjust your expectations as you go along. And sometimes that's required. Sometimes you think you're in a story for one reason, and it turns out the author is intending to do something different. And so you have to adjust your expectations as you go along. But that is very important in order to lead to an optimal experience. Another one is that action and awareness merges. And so I liked the example I read in an article about this, where kids at play, they immediately do this. If a kid decides, I'm going to be a pirate, they're immediately a pirate. They don't think, I think I will be a pirate and then act it out. The action and the awareness of what they're doing, it all comes together in that moment. So when you're climbing the rock, again, you're aware and you're doing the action. It's all one thing, it's all happening. When you're reading the book, you're in the story at the same time as your eyes are scrolling past the words. So it's important that action and awareness merge, they come together as one in a flow experience and not one then the other. And then the next is concentration is deep. This is something that Csikszentmihalyi talks a lot about. He refers to it as psychic energy. Another way I think it could be described is cognitive load. And we have certain limitations for how much cognitive load we have. I mean, we do eventually have to rest and sleep, those kinds of things. But there are various things that can affect our concentration. There could be physiological factors that are affecting our concentration, various medications, various conditions. I know for me personally, if I don't sleep enough, that greatly hinders my concentration, my ability to concentrate. So there are various factors. There could be environmental factors as well. So if you're in an environment with maybe a lot of notifications going off, social media, or maybe a lot of busy noise, that might affect your concentration. Maybe having a messy space is affecting that, or a clean space. So it's important to understand how various factors are affecting you personally, because I think everybody's very individual when it comes to concentration and the factors that affect them. But it's important that when you're having an optimal experience, that you are completely in the task at hand, that you're completely immersed in the book or the story. Your concentration is fully, fully, fully invested in that story. And that also leads to our perception of time, because our perception of time completely changes when we're in a full experience. And so I think many of you could probably relate. You think that you're just going to read to the end of the chapter, and the next thing you know, you've read the next 5 chapters, and another hour went by and you weren't even aware because you were so in the story. The idea that time flies when you're having fun, your perception of time definitely changes. That used to happen to me when I used to do a lot of artwork. I would get so into the task at hand, into drawing a piece of art, that I would just completely lose sense of time. Another one is that control is possible. Now, he talks quite a bit in this book about control and the paradox of control and control in various situations. Because, for example, if you're surfing a wave, you're not in control of that wave, but you feel like you can exercise some control in that situation. And so when it comes to reading, I think that the ways in which we exercise control, whether consciously or unconsciously, are the ways that we create meaning out of what we're reading, the ways that we're able to identify themes or relate to characters, to feel emotions. And then this next one is going to sound slightly contradictory to exercising control, and that's going to be that self consciousness disappears. This is my favorite one. I got so lit up the first time I ever read about this. The idea here is not that you lose a sense of self and you don't lose consciousness, but you temporarily forget yourself. You're so immersed in the task at hand. You're so at one with the task at hand. The rock climber becomes the rock, that kind of thing. that you might be somebody, for example, if you're reading a book, you might have the book open. You might be aware that I'm reading this object called a book. These are words on a page. I am a person reading. There's another person who wrote this book that I'm reading. But really, your attention is on the story. You're immersed in the story. You're at one with the story. So there is no separation there. And I just think that's one of the most beautiful, amazing things. This next line, too, he says, and the ability to forget temporarily who we are seems to be very enjoyable. So it's funny that we tend to have the best experiences when we're not thinking about ourselves. And then the next line, which is my favorite line probably, when not preoccupied with ourselves, we actually have a chance to expand the concept of who we are. This relates to one of my other favorite topics, which is self efficacy. Basically, this builds our confidence in who we are. So, the interesting thing is there's a paradox here. When we're having an optimal experience, when we're having a flow experience, we're not really in our minds, we're not really thinking about ourselves, we're not conscious of ourselves in that way, we're not self conscious. But when we finish the task at hand, we have an expanded sense of self. An example, I'll give you an example. Let's say that I've never read a sci fi book before, and I'm really intimidated by the concept of reading sci fi. And there's the book Dune, and I'm scared to read it because I don't know that I would enjoy sci fi for one. I don't feel like I'm smart enough to enjoy a sci fi book, and it's a really big book. So I might have some limited ideas of myself before I read Dune. And then I read Dune and I have the best experience ever. I become totally immersed in the story. I get very carried away in my reading experience. And then when I finish the book, I suddenly realize I finished Dune. I love sci fi. What else does this mean about me? There's this expansion of possibility and wonder about oneself and what that could mean. So I think that's very cool personally. So obviously, all these different particular components, they're things that are in common for flow experiences. And at the same time, this is a book that goes into detail. He gives examples of variations on each of these components. So if you felt like anything I said was a little oversimplified, there might be more explanation here to unpack. But I think it goes without saying that many of us have had these experiences before and that they can all lead to an optimal reading experience. So, in summary, these various factors are things that we might experience when we're having an optimal reading experience. And I think it's also safe to say that the flip side of these factors can pull us out of potential for ever having a flow experience. For example, with the idea that a book needs to meet us at our skill level. If a book feels too difficult, like let's say I'm reading a historical fiction and I have no clue about the historical period I'm reading about, and I'm really having a hard time understanding what the author is trying to illustrate, then maybe that is a little too difficult for me at that moment. Maybe I need to learn a few things before going into the book, build that skill level up a bit, or maybe the writing style is too dense. Maybe the characters aren't relatable for me and where I'm at. So that could be a factor, or it could be too easy. Maybe the book reads a little young, or I've read that kind of story a million times, or I just feel like the writing is very simplistic and maybe not engaging my mind enough or imagination enough. There could be various factors as far as the difficulty level that can affect having an optimal experience. Also, when it comes to goals and feedback. So, again, I think that can do with reading against the text. Maybe my expectations were in the wrong place for what the author had in mind with this book, or maybe I am not quite getting what the author is trying to illustrate. And then, of course, with action and awareness merging, or with your concentration being deep, obviously, if other factors are pulling your attention from the reading experience, you're probably not going to have the most optimal reading experience. Go figure, right? Another factor that I think could really hinder the reading experience when it comes to that, or being immersed in the task, being having your concentration in the task and being present with the task, is if you're constantly thinking about the next book in your TBR rather than being really truly with the story. I think that can possibly go against your reading experience. So those are just things to keep in mind if you find that you're struggling to get into a story. So it takes time. I think it takes time to know what your skill level is, the type of books that appeal to you, that you can relate to, and that you can lose yourself in. Please let me know in the comment section down below your flow experience again, or any thoughts on this topic and as it relates to reading. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day. Bye bye.